Good evening. I hope everybody can hear me okay, because I'm trying something completely different. Wasn't going to do a stitch with me tonight, hence the reason I don't. I look a mess, man. I was supposed to not see anyone all night, so I didn't really think about it. Anyway, I was sitting here and I'm stitching on Monopoly, and it is long rows of the same color. So I was like, it's kind of the perfect thing to stitch while doing a stitch with me video, because I have enough of it outlined that I don't have to count very much, and it's just there and back and there and back and there and back, filling my way down. So, and then when I go and highlight my pattern, I can go back and count it all. I don't really have to worry about it. Also, I'm not getting any service tonight, so there's no playing on Facebook or Instagram or anything like that. There's also no getting phone calls, so I decided to use my phone for recording and my iPad for my pattern. And I have one of those. I bought it for recording some videos on the way to the cross-stitching retreat that you suction cup to the window and put your phone on. So I did that, which is why you're kind of up a little bit. I was hoping it would mean you could kind of see me stitch. I'll see if I can stitch like this instead of having it sitting on the counter. But, you know, like we've all said before, and like plenty of people said when they commented on my last stitch with me video, they don't really look at the stitching anyway. They stitch and just look up every once in a while. So this should work. We're gonna try it again this week. Like I said, because this is probably the easiest project in the entire world to be doing while doing a stitch with me. And like I promised last time, I have a story for you, and it's kind of a long one if I make sure and give all the details. So I wanted to make sure I could focus and not get distracted. So, mouse a little dry. I'm going to get started on that. I will give you a forewarning. What I have to talk about is not probably going to be interesting to 100% of my viewers. It's very personal, and I'm going to try my best to not get emotional about it. But it's something that I want to talk about. It's something I wouldn't mind having on record for myself as having said. So anyways, that's what I'm going to talk about today. If you do not like it, feel free to click off and go find somewhere else to be. There are plenty of Stitch With Me videos out there, plenty of other Flosstubers to go watch. I appreciate all those that are subscribed to me and come back every time I post a video, which I feel like I've been doing fairly regularly. So here we go. Because I know there are several people who are curious. And because I make so many, I talk about it in bits and pieces in so many of my videos, it'd be kind of nice to have a full out explanation of what I'm talking about. So, this is the story of my son's medical condition. I'm going to backtrack a little bit further than him being born, just to kind of give you an idea about me a little bit too. I said in my last, maybe not my last Stitch With Me video, the one where I talked about me and my husband, which, by the way, Today is March 3rd. On March 10th, we have been together for 15 years. Dating, not married, for 15 years. But anyway, we got married November 7th, 2006. And then I found out I was pregnant in January, February, sometime in there. My daughter was born in September. And that was all good. I knew for a very long time that I wanted to have at least 2 kids. Honestly, I kind of wanted 4 before mine got old enough to where I didn't want the big gap. I didn't want to feel like I was starting all over. But I wanted at least 2, and I didn't want them very far apart because my sister and I, we're 2 years apart, and I felt like we were really close growing up. We were each other's best friends, especially for me because I didn't make friends as easily as she did. I only ever had like one friend at any given time because that's just how it was. So I always had her, and I wanted my kids to be close. And honestly, before I had kids, I wanted a boy first for that whole older brother thing because I didn't have an older brother. I married my husband and now I have 3 older brothers. But, I wanted that for my kids. But then, of course, when I got pregnant, it was a girl. And I wanted a girl so bad that I was okay with that. So, just after Lexi turned 2, I started talking to my husband. I'm like, I'm ready to have another one. I don't want them to be very far apart. And we weren't in the best place financially for having a second kid. So he decided to go into the military. And that way we would have, I know they don't get paid the best, but there's that stability that you are getting a paycheck every pay period or whatever, for however long you sign the contract for. And my husband signed the contract for, I want to say 6 years. He was going to enlist for 6 years. And we decided that we would get pregnant before he went off to boot camp in his terms so that he didn't have to be around for the pregnancy. He says that I'm hard to deal with when I'm pregnant, but he's the only one who's ever said that, so I think it was just a joke. Anyway, and that way, by the time he got out of boot camp, I would be almost due. We would be stationed somewhere, and we would have housing and all this, that, and the other. That was the plan. So I found out I was pregnant in July of 2009, literally like 2 weeks before he left for boot camp. I found out I was pregnant. He went out to boot camp. While he was gone, I found out we were having a boy. We were both really excited. And then he got injured in boot camp. So he ended up having to, he fought really hard to stay in, but the injury was too severe. They said if he could come out of the Army and get it fixed, that he could re-enlist. But to this day, he still has issues. So, that didn't work out. So, I was a little upset because I kind of felt like I had talked him into having this child. And now things were going to be tight and stressful and he was going to be upset. Of course, that wasn't the case. That was me with my anxieties and making the worst out of a bad situation. And he was excited. He was like, it's helping him deal and cope. So that was it. I was pregnant, and my pregnancy with my son was so much rougher than with my daughter. Like, I had morning sickness pretty much the entire pregnancy, spotting almost the entire pregnancy. Um, just, it was unusual. It was a lot different. And so, and I'm borderline diabetic on a normal day, like when I'm not pregnant, because I was diagnosed when I was 10 with hypoglycemia. So my blood sugar drops sometimes. And so I get the glucose test done at the beginning of my pregnancy. Excuse me. At the beginning of my pregnancy, when I first started going to the doctor, and then again whenever, 28 weeks, I believe, was when you normally get your glucose test. At the time, my doctor was in Houston, and I was living in West Texas. So I would have to drive down 8 hours to see my doctor. And then we were just gonna go, whenever I was getting close to due, I was gonna stay with my mom to have the baby and then go back to West Texas, because I didn't want to change doctors. It was the same doctor I had had with my daughter. I really liked him. I didn't want to change. And I had lived in Houston with my sister-in-law, my brother-in-law and my sister-in-law while he was in boot camp, so I had started seeing the doctor anyway. So I came down for my glucose test, and they had it at an outpatient facility, like not in the doctor's office. They did it at a blood center. And so I went in there, and they gave me my really sugary drink, and I was like, I really, really want a really big chocolate chip cookie. And I thought right then, that's a little unusual. They just dosed me with a lot of sugar. I should not be craving sugar. But I let it go. My next doctor's appointment, I went in and they said, have you done your glucose test? I said, yes, I did it at this facility that y'all sent me to. And they said, okay, well, we'll call over and we'll get the results. And if you've ever been pregnant before, or been through any type of blood work, typically no news is good news. So the fact that I never got a phone call saying, you did good on your glucose test, it wasn't unusual. That's very run of the mill. They've never called to tell me I'm healthy. They only call if you have a problem. So I didn't hear from anybody. Go in for my doctor's appointment a month later. They asked me the same question. And I said, no. Or I said, I already did it. Y'all are supposed to call over there. They're like, okay, we'll get it. When I'm 32 weeks along, I get a call one day. Ma'am, we finally got your results, and you failed the glucose test. We need you to come take the 3-hour glucose test to see if it was just a fluke or whatever. And I said, okay. So I went in there, I took the 3-hour one, I failed it. Miserably failed it. So I had gestational diabetes this entire time. Undiagnosed, untreated. I mean, once they tested me and they told me, then I started having to watch it, and I realized just how bad it had gotten. And I thought about I was going out to eat at Taco Bell almost every day. I was not eating healthy at all. Because I was just letting my cravings take over. So then he's like, okay, you need to go on a diet. You need to watch your sugars, da-da-da. And so I did. And, I went back in like 2 weeks later. No. The next week, I think. No, it would have been 2 weeks. Anyways, and I think it was a little bit longer than that. Anyways, I went for a while and I was trying to keep my blood sugar under control, but so 2 weeks later they sent me to a specialist, and they told me this lady was going to tell me how to eat, so that, because this was the opposite side of my normal issues with diabetes, and so I didn't really know how to control it. She told me basically they did a scan of the baby, an ultrasound, and the little ultrasound lady freaked out, went and got the doctor. The doctor came in and she's like, well, your baby's just kind of big. I said, okay. And they told me, you can't eat potatoes and breads and pastas, anything white. So that took out most of my diet. I didn't know how to eat like that. I felt like I was starving myself for 2 weeks. On Valentine's, my sister-in-law is like, okay, what can I feed you? Because it was my husband and his brother, and then his brother's wife and myself. And she's like, what can I feed you? Because you have the gestational diabetes. I said, well, I can't eat this, this, and this. She said, well, that rules out everything in my house. Where can we go out to eat? I said, well, we could go to Chili's, because if I have steak, that's red meat. I get beans instead of the mashed potatoes. That's protein. And then, vegetables. She's like, okay. So we went out to eat, and she's like, you're having a lot of contractions. Can we go to the hospital? I said, no, they don't hurt. So I have a doctor's appointment tomorrow. Unless they start hurting, I'm just going to wait to see the doctor tomorrow. So the next morning I go to my doctor, and he looks at my numbers, and he says, well, you did a pretty good job, but we need it to be a little bit better. And so I'm going to put you on an insulin pill, and we'll induce you in like a week and a half. I said, okay. He said, let's just check you and we'll send you home. I said, okay. And my sister is sitting in the waiting room with my daughter. My sister is, let's see, I was 19. She was 17. She was still in high school. Had barely gotten her driver's license. And she's out in the waiting room with my daughter. And the doctor says, you're in labor. You need to go to the hospital right now. You're already 4.5 centimeters dilated. This baby is coming now. So I went to the hospital. My sister had to drive in a town she didn't recognize. Had to figure out how to get home, get my daughter to my mother, pick up my husband so that he could be up at the hospital. She was freaking out, but she did a great job. So I had him February 15th, 2010. And it was really good, because they were worried about like his blood sugar bottoming out, because he had been in this cocoon that was feeding him so much insulin. They were worried he would bottom out. He did fine. He came home in a couple days. But I always had this feeling like something was wrong, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And I mean, he would cry all the time, which, I mean, I know that's not unusual for a baby, but and I didn't really think anything of the crying per se, but there was just something I couldn't pinpoint that was wrong. He hated sleeping on his back from day one. Wanted to sleep on his, well, I wouldn't let him sleep on his belly, so he had to sleep on his side. I would roll up like the receiving blankets on both sides of him, but then I would be like panicky all night and waking up every half hour to make sure he was fine. So, and even my sister-in-law, who was a nurse at the time, she's like, there's just something, can't put my finger on it. So when he was 3 months old, he gets a checkup from the doctor at 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. Every time she said he was fine. At 3 months old, she said, okay, so I have a concern. And she showed me like how stiff his movements were, because I don't know how to explain, but most babies, when you hold them, they like curl up into you like they do in the uterus. They're like all balled up when you hold them. My son never did. His legs were always outstretched. He laid flat. And so she said, it's not abnormal. Some, it's rare, but some kids have that issue. She said, but it typically goes away about the time they're 3 months old. His is not going away. I think he has something. I'm going to refer him to a neurologist. I said, okay. Then I freaked out and got in the car and looked up what she told me about and started freaking out. And, being a parent. So then, this is probably going to be a really long one, y'all. I'm barely getting started. I called the neurologist's office. They couldn't get him in for 2 months. I said, okay. And then she called me back 5 minutes later. She said, we had a cancellation. Can you be here in 20 minutes? I said, yes, I can. So I rushed with 2 kids over to the neurologist's office, and he looked at him a little bit. He said, okay, I need scans. I need to see what's going on. We're going to admit him to the hospital in Galveston. I said, okay. So then he got admitted to the hospital. They ran a CT, an MRI, did all their blood work, typical hospital stuff. And they came back and they told me he had hydrocephalus with Chiari Malformation. I knew what hydrocephalus was because the doctor thought it was that, and that's what I had looked up and freaked out about, because I knew it meant surgery. I had never heard of Chiari Malformation. So, a brief explanation, because I didn't even know. I had to be explained to. Hydrocephalus is the fluid, you have cerebral spinal fluid in your brain that it's supposed to go in your brain, circulate, go down your spine, circulate. It's this constantly moving thing. When you look at a scan of the brain, you'll see 2 little worms. It looks like worms in your brain. And that is the cerebral spinal fluid. Ryan's looked like big butterflies. Like there was a ton of fluid, it had nowhere to go. So it was building up, and that's why he was crying, because it was building pressure. He basically had a headache. Now, when they're babies, because their soft spot is not sealed shut, their skull expands to make room for that fluid. So his head was bigger than it was supposed to be. Just all kinds. So it wasn't as much pressure as it would have been had it been closed, but it was still a lot of pressure for him. And so, like, when I would sit him in the car seat and he would scream, it's because being on his back increased that pressure and caused him pain, which is why I never liked to sleep on his back. Chiari Malformation is typically seen in spina bifida patients, but can happen without it. And I know I've discussed this one a little bit before, but I'll go through it again. At the base of the skull, where your spine comes up to meet your skull, there's a hole. And the fluid is supposed to go down and up and all that through that hole. Well, his brain had gotten stuck in the hole. The pressure had pushed it down and it got stuck. That's the theory. They can't say for sure whether it got stuck and that caused the buildup, or if the buildup pushed it down and that's the reason it got stuck. We don't know which came first, the chicken or the egg. That's what I always say. So then we had 2 options. And most people will not do a surgery on a Chiari's. They will not relieve the pressure there because it is such an intensive surgery. It was very specialized surgery. Our doctor could do it, but was choosing not to. He said, let's get the pressure off his brain first and see if that fixes it. And then if it doesn't, we'll go from there. Especially because he's 3 months old right now. Well, I mean, by the time we got to the neurosurgeon, because they discharged us from the hospital, they said, he's got this, he needs surgery, bye. And gave me referrals to the neurologist, the neurosurgeon, the geneticist, there was about 2 or 3 other doctors. We were scheduled to see all these different doctors in the next 2 weeks. It was insane. So when we saw the neurosurgeon, he says he needs surgery now. We're going tomorrow. We're going to put a shunt in his head, and it's got a little tube that goes into the middle of his brain where the fluid is built up. Brings it to a little device that's on the side of his head here, and then drains it down to his stomach. And the device allows us to like check the pressure and all this stuff. So he said, let's get the pressure off the brain, see if it fixes the Chiari's. So that was his first surgery when he was approximately 3.5 months old. And so we went back and we saw the doctor after a couple months just to check on it. It was doing great. It had flushed a bunch of the fluids out. But he said it didn't fix the Chiari's. So he was going to need a decompression, but as long as he could maintain his status, we were going to wait, because the older he got, the greater, or the less risk involved, you know. The older he got, the better he would come through surgery and that sort of thing. So he wanted to give it a year before he did the decompression. We made it to November. So he got diagnosed the end of May, had the surgery in June. By November, he was having too many issues, and the doctor said, we've given it as much time, you know, we've already reduced the risks this amount of percentage. I don't know, it's been a long time. He said, but we need to do it. I said, okay. So it's supposed to be a 4-hour surgery, and what they were going to do is take off a piece of the skull right above that hole and create like a little tent, some space in there, and put a plate over it. Now, they said they weren't sure if they were going to be able to do the plate because a baby's skull is very soft, and they weren't sure it would be able to stay, like the screws and stuff, because the skull is so soft. So they weren't sure whether or not they were going to be able to cover it. It was supposed to be a 4-hour surgery, 4.5, something like that. At about the 5.5-hour mark, I started freaking out because, and you know, this is a major thing, and we have lots of family, and they all wanted to be there. So I am sitting in a waiting room with like 6 or 7 other people. My mom, my stepdad, my husband's mom and dad, my grandmother, like my other grandmother. There was a ton of people in this waiting room waiting to see what's going on, and we were supposed to hear something at 4 hours. We checked the board, it hasn't changed. So I'm starting to get panicky, and now I've got all these people who want to talk to me and want to console me, and it was very, very stressful. And I was like, I kind of just need some space. But I didn't want to leave the waiting room, because what if they came in to tell me about my son? So finally at 6 hours, they come out and they tell us that it was just, when they got in there, the swelling to the brain stem where it connected with the hole had gotten more severe. So they had to make judgment calls. So they had to remove the top vertebrae of his spine. They had to cauterize part of his brain to get it to move back up to where it's supposed to go. Then they put the tent in, and then they put a titanium plate over it. They said because of this, he can never play football. He can never do any contact sports. We have to just be very careful because he's missing a vertebrae. He could very easily, you know, get hit and it be detrimental. So, okay. So then we got past that part. And that one was the hardest recovery, because, like, he had been face down in this U-shaped, you know, to where there was a U-shaped pillow and his face in a hole so he could breathe, you know, but he was such a tiny baby that being that way for so long, his face was super swollen. He, you know, he had to be on morphine because it was very painful, just all this stuff. We spent a week in the hospital, and at the time, I had just started working as a nurse's aide at a nursing home. So I had to go back to work. and I was dependent on my husband and all the rest of my family to be up there with him. I couldn't go and spend the night up there because I couldn't get good enough sleep to have to work the next day. So I was going a couple days without seeing him. It really, really sucked. So we get him back home, and a few months later, so then we do the other routine doctors, and they said that, like, we went to the ENT, and they said that he had fluid buildup in his eardrum or whatever, inner ear or something like that. Basically, they put tubes in both his ears to drain that fluid out. So, like, he was at this age now where he should have been able to talk, and he wasn't talking because he couldn't hear. Like, he couldn't not hear at all, but they said it sounded when people was talking a pillow underwater. Like, it was really hard to hear for him. And so they put the tubes in, and then things started getting better. Of course, then that caused a lot of ear infections. So then we had to get the tubes taken out. And each one of those is a surgery, though, of course, not nearly as major. Then he started getting headaches really bad again, or as he was a baby and couldn't tell me they were headaches, he would just start screaming maniacally for hours at a time. And it turned out the shunt was pulling too much fluid off, and so his brain got stuck in the holes of the tube, and it was causing too much fluid. Then his brain got stuck in the holes, and so then they had to remove that tube and put a new one. Well, when they did, there was some bleeding involved, but everything was fine. He came through just fine, and they had to replace that shunt the first time. So then, let's see, I'm trying to think, because it's been a lot of surgeries, and you have your major ones, and then you have your ones in between. So then it turned out he had sleep apnea, because he kept making this weird noise in the middle of the night, like he was trying to catch his breath, and it would wake him up and make him upset because he's kind of a light sleeper. So they did a sleep test. They said he had sleep apnea, so they were going to have to remove his tonsils and his adenoids. So we went in for that surgery, and they came out and told me they couldn't do the surgery because his esophagus had not grown with him. So it was too small to get the intubation tube down to keep him under long enough to do the surgery. So then we had to do a balloon dilation surgery where they took him in and they put a tube down his esophagus, and with a balloon on the end, and then they blew up the balloon, let it sit there for a few minutes to expand the esophagus, and then they would take it out. Deflate it, pull it back out, and then we waited a while, and then they had to do it again till finally his esophagus had grown enough to where they could intubate him properly, and then we had the tonsils and adenoid surgery. That one, it sucks, man. I know that one's very routine and a lot of people have been through it, but gosh, his breath was so bad for days. And when they told me he had sleep apnea and couldn't do the surgery because the whole balloon dilation thing, he slept with us every night, because I was like, if he stops breathing, I need to know immediately. He can't be in another room. So then, of course, once he got back from surgery, we had to wean him into his own bed. On top of that, he wasn't feeling good, so we had him sleeping with us, and that breath could keep me up. And and of course it hurt, so then they give you the Tylenol with codeine, and that burned the rawness. Oh my goodness, it was just a mess. Anyways, so where am I at? Had the tonsils and adenoid surgery, had the balloon dilations, the ear tubes, the shunt revision. I feel like I'm forgetting something. Anyway, so then we went, then after that therapy. We had to do tons of physical, occupational therapy. It took him forever to walk. You know, and that's one thing with when you mess with the brain and when the fluid builds up, they don't know, they can't tell you whether or not anything was affected by it. And he's so young that you don't know. So you're constantly, you want him to walk to know that he can walk. You want him to talk so you know that he can. You want to teach him stuff and see if he can retain it. You know, you're constantly, did it affect anything? So it does affect his eyes. He's had glasses since he was a toddler. At one point, because he had this one eye that would just like drop, he had to wear a patch over his eye a couple hours every day, over the one eye, over the good eye, to strengthen the bad eye. He kind of liked that though, because he got the one patch and he looks like a pirate. And in order to work the eye muscle, you need him to constantly be using his eyes. So we let him play on a tablet for an entire hour. Yeah, so really cool when you're that young. But for the most part, we had avoided surgery for a few years. And we had moved back to West Texas here a few years, about 4 years ago. And he was going in for one of his routine checkups with his neurosurgeon, because once you have a specialty like that, you don't just find a new doctor when you move, you know. It's a process if somebody will even take somebody who has been touched like that. So we were driving back to Houston twice a year to do an MRI and make sure, everything was fine. And so this time we were doing this checkup, I was like, I'm going to ask the doctor, because it's been good, if we can either only do once a year, or if maybe he has a colleague in the area that can do the scans, and then if something's wrong, we can drive the 8 hours to go see him. That sort of thing, right? I'm all prepared to have this conversation. Another thing about his shunt is it had to be reset, because the magnets in the MRI would change the dial, and which would allow more fluid to come out or less. So we always had to have it reset. So we were in the office after the MRI getting that reset, and the doctor comes in and he pulls up the scans, and I'm all ready for the A-OK and to have this conversation. And he says, well, that's not good. Okay, what now? He had fluid buildup in his spine now. Not like the head was all good, the Chiari's was all good. His spine had a fluid buildup. He said he hasn't been walking funny, complaining of pain, anything like. Nope. He's like, okay, well, we'll just keep an eye on it. See you back in 6 months. We'll check on it. Between the 6 months, before we could get back down there, I was, of course, madly watching for any signs of problems. Ryan presented in the weirdest way possible, and it took me a while to figure out what it was. I thought because we had moved, he had digressed from being fully potty trained to needing a pull-up because he was having accidents. And so I was getting upset because it was getting worse, and I was having to clean up poop a few times a day, and with, you know, this kid that's supposed to be going into pre-K soon, or maybe he did start pre-K that year, and I was having to go up to the school and change, you know, his clothes. It became this whole issue. Turns out bowel incontinence is one of the signs of the fluid buildup in his spine. So we went back to Houston, and they did surgery on his spine, and they put in a shunt in the middle of his spine. And what it does is the tube goes in between, goes through the spine and in between where all the nerves are, and goes up there, and it drains the fluid out here to another device and then around into his stomach. And then, so then we had that. And I was really impressed, because at this point, he is big enough to talk, tell me what hurts, hate what is going on. You know, when he was a baby, he couldn't express himself other than just crying. Most of the time, he was good. But now he's older and he understands what's going on, and he did really well. By the end of the day, he was refusing pain medicine. He was getting up and walking around the hospital, and he even hugged his surgeon. And he's been seeing this guy since he was 3 months old, but like the neurosurgeon's like, most kids after I cut on them, they don't want anything to do with me. And here he is hugging me. So it was pretty awesome. And then the summer of doom. So like I said, his big sign that something is going wrong is the incontinence. And it was just about time to have the first shunt checked again, or the spinal shunt checked, just the routine checkup. And I started noticing he was having accidents. So I was like, I'm going to call and tell Mahanti, but, oh, sorry, that's his doctor's name. But we're getting close to needing to go down for a checkup anyway. Well, then, he started having headaches. And at first, you know, he's like, Mommy, I need something for my head. Okay, I'll get you something. And I didn't really think much of it. And then I was on the phone and I was talking to my mom, and I was telling her how I needed to make the appointment because he was starting to become incontinent, and he came out and he was crying about his head hurting. And I went, oh my gosh, Sam, wake up. And so I went to check his shunt, and when I pushed in, it would go down, but it wouldn't come back up. Now, if it goes down, that means it can clear out the tube between the device and his stomach, but if it doesn't fill up, it's not being able to, like, there's a blockage between the brain and the device, which means there could be buildup. And I called the neurosurgeon's office, and he said, well, take him to the nearest MRI or nearest place, get a CT scan, check the tubes, blah, blah, blah. So I did. They didn't see anything. So, but I was not okay. So I called his surgeon, and he's like, well, you're going to have to bring him to me. So I stuck him in a car, and we were driving 8 hours to his neurosurgeon. And I mean, we were going straight to the hospital. And it was the middle of summer with no AC in my car. And he's screaming in pain. He's vomiting. We were having to stop every few hundred miles, or every so often for him to start throwing up and crying. And then we would get him something to drink, and he would pass out for a little while and then wake up crying. We get to the hospital, and we go to the emergency room, and we're like, you need to page Dr. Mahanti. He knows we're coming, blah, blah, blah. They were trying to convince me that he was just dehydrated. I said, no, I know what's going on. You need to just get my doctor down here. So we got admitted to the floor. Turns out his head shunt broke, like straight up snapped. And the one in his spine was clogged, which they say is very common in the spinal canal because it's such a very small tube. So we had to replace both in the same day. At first they were going to do one day because the brain one was very vital, and they were going to do the spine one a couple days later. I said, as long as he can, you know, we can manage it with pain medicine, let's wait the couple days and do them both at the same time. So that's what we did. And then he replaced both. And so then the next year, we didn't even make an entire year. When we went to have a checkup done, there was a fluid buildup in the spine in a different place. Oh, hold on. The double surgery was a little more intense. I left some details out. So they get in there. They do this surgery first, and they call me and they say it all went well. Now we're gonna open up the spine. I said okay. So then they come out after the surgery, and the doctor said, okay, so there's some scar tissue buildup by where we did the surgery the first time. And that scar tissue is what blocked the tube. Like, it got in there and it blocked it. So then, I had put the charger in my phone before I lose y'all. Okay. So, he said that's common, and unfortunately, there's not much we can do about that. But because of the scar tissue buildup, when they went to take the tubing out to put new tubing in, it's a very delicate situation because you've got all your nerves right there in the spine, and they jostled them. And he said he may have weakness in his feet. And then he said, you know, they weren't able to put the there's like this little bone that goes over your spine. They weren't able to put it back because at this point, having to remove it twice had whittled it down, and stapling it back down or whatever had caused it to deteriorate. So they couldn't put that back. So my husband's freaking out about the fact that there's a piece of his spine exposed. I'm freaking out because my son may not walk. And so we're both freaking out. And I think the reason I freaked out more that time than the time before that is the time before that I had all the bad thoughts. What if? What if he can't walk after the surgery? What if he can't, you know, go to the bathroom anymore? I have to clean him up all the time. What if? I did that right before the first surgery to his spine. This time I'm like, it's routine. We've done it before. Mahanti, you know, he's the greatest doctor in the whole world and no problem. Now, granted, none of this was his fault. It is what it is. It's a symptom of his condition. So we asked the doctor, we're like, okay, so what about the spine? And he goes, well, we couldn't put it back because it had deteriorated, but it's no problem. It's not going to cause any issues. The husband's good. So then, after he woke up and he started feeling good, he got up and he walked. He did. He was fine. And when the doctor came to see us to, you know, check up on him, the look of relief in this doctor's face was crazy. And he looked at us and he said, I thought he wasn't going to walk. He honestly believed, like he told us, there would probably be weakness in his feet as a nice way of saying it. And he's like, I honestly thought he was not going to walk out of this hospital. So, sorry. He got through it just fine. He's great and dandy. So, he's a very strong little boy. So then, like I said, we go down, we have another scan. There's fluid. Well, they told us because of the scar tissue and this very small tube, there is a higher chance of occlusion, like being blocked. And the only thing we can do for that is to pull it out and put another one in. And because that scar tissue is there, every time we run into this problem of if it gets stuck or, you know, if we pull a little too hard or something, there could be permanent effects. So we're like, and I even asked him, I said, could we put, if we have to do it again, can we put it in a different part of his spine and run it up and down so that we're not messing with that same issue of scar tissue? And he said that's not possible. And we went through all these different scenarios with them, and basically we had to accept that we run this risk all the time and we just have to deal with that. So we came to terms with it. So then the next time we go to get an MRI, there's fluid buildup again, and we're like, oh, we're gonna have to risk this again. And he's like, well, actually, this one's in a different part of the spine, so we're going to have to go in where it's at instead of through the place where it was before. So that's good. We're not messing with the scar tissue. We're not pulling the old tube out. But now he's going to have a second shunt in his spine. You know, and it connects to the first shunt over on the valve, and then goes around to the stomach. So then he had that surgery, and at this point, my son's pretty freaking tired of surgeries. Like, he's gotten to the point he's like, do I have to? Like, he was freaking out going to the hospital. But he's kind of funny too, because they give him this stuff called Tylenol with Vero, and it's to make them have less anxiety when they go to be put under. And I've had, for almost every surgery, we've had the same anesthesiologist too. Like, I call and request him because he is so great with my son. And so they give him this Tylenol with Vero, it makes him loopy, it makes him drunk. Like, when he was like a baby, couldn't really talk, but, you know, could, like toddler age, he could walk, but he couldn't talk. He would like totally hit on the nurses and like grab on their boobs and stuff, and they just kind of had to be like, oh no. So you can't really blame him. He's a kid. And then now, like, this last time, he was so loopy, and he kept, like, he's only allowed to have a gown on, like no underwear, and he kept trying to take his gown off. Like, he kept pulling on it and trying to get it off, and then when the doctor would come by, he would like flip his leg up and show all his spare parts. It was really funny. So anyways, I really still feel like I've missed a surgery in there somewhere, but it wasn't one of the major ones, because he has had 12 surgeries, and he just turned 8 years old. So let me count. Let's see. We got the first shunt. We got the revision of that shunt. I'm not going in order. We had the Chiari decompression. We had tonsils and adenoids, balloon dilations, ear tubes in, ear tubes out. We had the back surgery, the back and the head surgery, another back surgery. Yep, that's 12. So I remember them all. And I'm feeling really good about where we are right now, like, but he's still never out of the woods completely. Like, this is one of those things that it can affect this, that, and the other, and I never know what to expect from day to day. But he does really well with it. If you met him on the street, you would have no way of telling that there was anything going on with him, because he's very much a normal kid. His speech still needs a little work. Like I said, he wears glasses. That'll be forever. But, I mean, y'all have seen him on videos. He looks fine. He's very self-conscious about his scars. Getting him to take off his shirt to go to the public pool doesn't happen very often. At first I thought it was like I don't want the girls to see me type thing, but I'm really thinking it's kind of a self-consciousness of, because it literally looks like he has a zipper from mid-skull all the way down his back, because the Chiari surgery was the first one from here to here. I don't know if you can really see that. And then he had one in the middle of his back, and then the new one was in between the two, so they almost completely connect. It's crazy. So, and then now, like I explained last time, he's got the jaw thing. And we live in a town that's all about football. We're in West Texas, and high school football is the biggest thing. And, you know, we have pee-wee football and everything. And it was hard to explain to him that he's not allowed to do those things. And so I was trying to explain it to him, and in the process, I didn't explain it quite right. Because I was telling him, you know, we have to be careful, because if you get hit, it could be very bad. So I don't know what we were talking about one day, and he popped off with, you know that thing in my head that if they hit, it'll kill me? Right in front of a bunch of people, and they just all turn and stare at me. And I was like, oh, Ryan. Oi, kid. It's a, what can you do? But, I honestly believe that my gestational diabetes caused it, because the thing about gestational diabetes is it causes fluid retention, and that's why his head was so big, and that's why, you know, like, they didn't think I was going to be able to deliver him naturally. They thought they were going to have to do a C-section. I proved them wrong, but you know, he was a very big, I was 36 weeks and 1 day when I had him, and he was 9 pounds 14 ounces. He was a very big baby. So I really think that had a lot to do with it. Because I think he retained the fluid in his head. It caused the hydrocephalus and the Chiari Malformation, and here we are. I have no way of proving that, and by the time I went to a lawyer to see if there was any way somebody else could prove it, they said that if I wanted to do it, I would have had to done it the first 2 years of his life. So, and by the time, you know, I got through the majority of it to be even calm enough to deal with, you know, is this the cause, yada yada, he was 4. So, I don't know. PSA, make sure you do your gestational diabetes check. Make sure that the results get posted, or that your office gets the results, and you know, make sure you're healthy, because being healthy is very important when you're pregnant. Getting the checks regularly when they're a baby, very important, because had I not done that, it was his 3-month checkup when she discovered the problem, and it was his doctor that discovered it. So if you, I know that there are these paranoid moms out there, and I thought to myself, when I couldn't put my finger on what was wrong, I thought, I can't just take him to the doctor and be like, there's something wrong, and I don't know what it is, and it's just a feeling. But you gotta trust your gut sometimes, because every time I have had a feeling that something is going wrong, we've had a surgery. So that's just how it is. There's something else. It's also, Chiari Malformation can be a hidden killer. Like, that sounds bad. I don't know a better way to say it. You could have, could have Chiari Malformation and have no idea that I have it, because it's manageable, and then one day you could wake up and not be able to walk. I know I have said this before, but I just want to reiterate it. It's one of those things you could have your entire life, and then one day all of a sudden it decides to flare up and cause you a whole headache full of issues. Because I had a friend that, you know, her whole entire life she was a perfectly healthy person, and woke up one morning and could not walk anymore, is fully paralyzed, just because it finally like swelled up and cut off whatever nerve, or however it works. I'm not a doctor, but I'm just telling you, anyone could have it. It doesn't necessarily get diagnosed at birth. So if you're having headaches, if you're having any issues you just don't feel right about, get it checked, because there's a chance, you know, somebody could find something. It may not be Chiari's, it may be something completely other than that, but just know that you need to make sure you're healthy. Okay, so this is an hour-long Stitch With Me video. Oh my goodness. I filled in pretty much all this while I was talking to y'all. I am fixing to have to get to a point where I count a little bit. So I'm gonna let y'all go. I kind of wish I had a positive story to end with, because I know this wasn't, I don't know. I think his story is positive. It's just, it was scary for a long time. He's been through a lot, but he is completely fine and normal now. And if anything happens, I will let you know. So y'all have a great stitchy week, and I will see y'all very soon.